Hey, everybody. It's awesome to be here with you. Welcome to the stream. How's everybody's Global Hack Week going, huh? I hope you all are learning and getting some rest in between sessions and making some new friends. Great. Aravapa, awesome to hear. Glad you're having a good time. And for all of you who haven't done so already, please make sure to check in for this session. I'm just posting the link over here. So check the chat for the link for the check-in. Hey there, Byte3H380. And the Grinch watches. It says, definitely super interesting, learned a lot. That's great. Great to hear. Well, hopefully today you all will learn some more. And remember to check in using that link, because it's really important for us to know what sessions people like. What are people's favorite things? Oh, it's actually Bytehead. Sorry about that, Bytehead, but yeah. Now I will never forget it now. Hi there, Shizu, and that's me, Adarsh. Hi there, Adarsh. And Green Willow. It's great to see some familiar faces from our previous sessions, and hopefully this session will be just as informative as the last ones. So I'm going to open up access again to our PowerPoint slides so that anyone with the link can check them out. And I want to paste them in. And that'll be really helpful for us as we progress through today's workshop. It'll be really helpful for us to have those going. So tell me, have you all ever used React before? Because today we're going to get a little bit into React, not too much. Anyone in the chat known about React? Awesome. So ethical kata, I want to know how much these learnings are close to actual job-ready skills. And that's a great question. So I'll tell you, for example, the framework that we are learning today is going to be used by lots of big tech companies and also smaller companies, businesses that want to create a full stack application to facilitate their business. So, learning how to develop in multiple different frameworks, full stack frameworks, is actually really helpful because you never know which one the company that you're applying for a job is going to be using. Maybe they will use React, maybe they will use Vue.js, maybe they will use Flask. You just never know. And yes, Facebook actually did start the React project, or I guess Meta now. Yes, Next.js, Remix, really great. And so the Grinch Watcher says Vue versus Angular versus React. What are the differences exactly? So there's slight differences in features as well as syntax, but actually they all are performing a really similar function, which is to provide a front end, a client-side framework. And currently doing an internship where we're using Next.js for the front end. That's great. So hopefully today you'll gain some even more skills. All right, well, if you navigate in these slides to day 3, which is on slide 54, that's where we're going to start today. And let me share my screen and show you all what day 3 is going to look like. So first we're going to start with a review from day 2. So let's check that out. We're going to be implementing reminders feature on day 2. And so, you may have remembered this from last time, but we added this reminder button functionality to our code base. And we did that by including a button HTML element in the front end scripts. So in our checklist.html file, we included this button that the user could press. And then it actually set off a script that was also contained on the front end. Could have been put on the back end as well, but it's a pretty simple script, so we just kept it right on the same page. And that function has a set timeout, which is a native JavaScript function that allows you to add some timing delay to whatever function you execute. And on the right-hand side here, you see what we got as our result, which was a reminder. And someone says, Yeah, thank you for sending that out, and we'll definitely go through that a little bit. So thank you for sending that out. That's Mia Darsh. So yeah, it's tough. That's a lot of information there. But before we get to React, everyone's excited for React today, but we're going to actually learn how to implement the SendGrid API. So we're going to do this first before we get to React. And in order to implement this, we're going to be using the SendGrid website to create an account, add a sender, integrate those things, and so forth. So go ahead and navigate to this first link, which is where you're going to sign up for a SendGrid account. And I'll even share my screen here. You can see I'm on that first link. And if you click Start for Free, that's going to be a really great way to do it. And I actually already have an account, so I won't go through this process, but that's going to be the way to sign up for a SendGrid account. Right? So I'm gonna leave a little bit of time for all of you to sign up. And in the meantime, I'm going to answer some questions in the chat. So someone says, we can use SMTP in Flask as a question. Absolutely. Flask is just a framework for designing your application. So anything you can do in Python, you can basically do with Flask. For example, there's, I think, a client called it's called like SMT. Honestly, I think it's just called like SMTP lib. Yeah, here you go. So here's just an example. Someone says, can you share the references link in the discussion window panel? Absolutely. What do you mean by the references link? Let me share some of the links from our session today so that everybody has them. The first link I'm going to share with you all is the check-in link. This is really important for checking in to the event and making sure that you're signed up and registered. I'll share another link, which is going to be a link to our slides for the day. So you can follow along with our slides. And I'll share one last link, which is going to be a link to our repository, which I've updated to include today's code, and probably a little bit of tomorrow's code as well is in there. So there's the three references for anyone who's joining late or wants to have them again. Another question is from Ethical Cod. I have a question. Can you please explain what is asynchronous in JavaScript? That's a great question. So asynchronous means that you are executing the function, but you're allowing JavaScript to move on and await for a response. So for example, let's say you have a promise with some server that you're trying to retrieve data from. Well, you send the request, but the server might not get back to you immediately. So you can wait for the response before executing the rest of that code script, and then JavaScript knows it can move on to other things. So it's a really efficient way to use your resources in parallel and to make sure that parts of your code do not run until you receive a handshake from that promise. All right. Flask versus Fast API. That's a good question. I'm not super familiar with Fast API, but maybe someone in the chat knows about it. And SMTP, what is SMTP? That's a great question. It is a protocol that is primarily used for mail. So HTTP is used for websites typically, and it's actually called Hypertext Transfer Protocol. So it's transferring hypertext, which is what websites are made of. SMTP is, I think, refers to Simple Mail Transfer Protocol. So instead of transferring hypertext, you're transferring simple mail, like a subject, header, body, recipient, stuff like that. All right. So let's answer another question. For the SendGrid signup, what should we use for company name and company website? Can we use MLH.io? Sure, that's fine. I don't think there's any problem with that if you want to use MLH.io, because we're doing this for the Global Hack Week. All right. So yeah, excellent. Thank you all of you for your answers in the chat, for answering each other's questions. I've noticed that folks are answering each other's questions. That's awesome. So definitely continue to do that. We have a great community that you can leverage. So don't hesitate to ask questions. Okay, so the next link is to create a sender, and we've already talked about this a little bit. But basically, this is a way that the internet keeps track of who's sending automated emails. So it's kind of required that you provide this information, like, what is your address and things of that nature. So yeah, go ahead and fill out your sender information. Also, I'll say if I think if you make this information accurate, it tends to not give you any problems. I've noticed that sometimes you can get a problem if you fill in some information that's not super accurate. It could actually trigger your account to not be opened, or like trigger some kind of delay. So yeah, just giving you a heads up there on that. I'm gonna put a little image of what the sender form looks like, so you know what you're looking at when you get there. All right, so hopefully I'll actually I'll go back in so that you can see that form. It's basically a way to get your information so that you can send emails in an automated way. Okay. And finally is this link for integrating the API with your project. So this link is really, really helpful. And I'll click share this tab instead so that we can all follow along together. And there's two different ways of setting this up. You can do an SMTP relay, which is going to be the easiest way to send an email. But Web API is a little bit more flexible and fast. So why don't we choose Web API? And when you get here, it's going to show you a little bit about different languages that you could use. So, for our first project with this Flask framework, we're going to use Python as our server side. But when we switch to our React framework, we're going to use Node.js as our backend. So, luckily SendGrid has an implementation for any framework or language you might want to use. So, I actually recommend trying them all. Maybe it would be really good to get practice in using all these different backends. But for today, we're going to choose Python. Right? And it's really great instructions. They tell you exactly what you need. So we already have Python, a proper version of Python. So there's no need to worry about that. And then in step 2, you're asked to create an API key. So we can actually call the API anything we want. You can see I've given a lot of different examples here, like test 1. We can say test 2. How about that? And when you click create key, it will generate a unique string of characters for you that's going to serve almost as your password or your passkey for accessing your SendGrid account. And for that reason, I'm not going to generate a new one here because I don't want you all to see any API password. But yeah, I'll show you how to hide those as well in this next step. So when you create a SendGrid API key, you want to actually store that in an environmental variables file, and we'll get to this later. This is going to be a way to hide the API key from anyone online who might want to steal it. So it's a good way of ensuring cybersecurity. right? And so this command here is having you export the SendGrid API key to this sendgrid.env file, and then it's telling you to put that in the git ignore, which we're going to go over all of these terms. And so you could feel free to follow step 3, or I'll also show you how to do it. Okay. And step 4 is to install SendGrid. So you're going to want to type pip install SendGrid in your terminal. And finally, step 5 is sending your first email. So you can copy this code. You're going to want to replace your this email address with your email address, or I'm sorry, the from email address with your email address, because it's only going to work if you are a verified sender. So replace this email address with the email address that you have in your sender. And yeah, you can replace the content with whatever you want, or just leave it that way. All right. So hopefully this is helpful to you. And if you then try to implement the code, they can test whether the code worked. All right. All right. Now we have a few questions here. So let me go back here. I got immediately suspended after creating an account. That's unfortunate. I'm sorry. Maybe try to use a different website, or yeah, I know it's really, it can be kind of tricky to make an account, honestly. I'm not sure why. Yeah, just try to make an account with the different information. All right. Another question is, should we not use the same passkeys in our code, or should we? I mean, is there a way to hide it? There is a way to hide it, and so I'm going to show you how to do that. We're going to use a .env file. And that's Mudar says, please show how to get env variable in main.py. I suffer a lot in that. Don't worry, we're gonna figure that out together today. And this is a great skill to know for producing web applications. So we're going to learn that today. Ethical Cod says git ignore is for ignoring some stated files not to be in commit list. That's right. Right. Okay, so let's continue on. And we've sort of gone through a little bit of our SendGrid stuff. Go back to the slides. And the integration guide, I had the link over here, but there's just another slide so that you can get the integration guide. And once you get your API key, you can see I have the information about it here. It says tutorial key is the API name. Of course, the API key itself is not visible, but then you can see API key permissions, and there's 3 different levels. You can do billing access, you can do restricted access, or you can do full access. And we're going to want full access because we don't want to deal with the customization. But honestly, if you were building a production scale application, you'd probably want to choose restricted access, so that even if somebody got your API key, they couldn't access your billing and things like that. All right. Now we're going to install the SendGrid package in our terminal. So you may have already done this. This was step 4, but you can check the GitHub link as well for SendGrid Python package in this slide. All right. And another thing we're going to install is this library called python.env. All right. Oh, someone says increase the font size a little bit. There you go. I'll just make it a little bit bigger for you. Hopefully that works. And remember, if you want to actually see the slides yourself, you can make this font as big as you'd like. So here is a link to that. All right, so what is this python.env package? Well, .env is actually used for accessing your env file and the variables within it right inside of your Python file. So there was a question about, hey, I struggle a little bit with .env. That's something we want to try, and it's just like, I mean, that's Midar says pip install python.env is how we're going to do it. So type that into your terminal to get that installed. And the way you can test whether or not it installed is by typing in your Python file import.env. And if that command does not give an error, then that means that you did it correctly. All right. So awesome. We're making great progress today. Yeah, now we're going to move on, and we're gonna edit the API key and your email address. Add these to your file, your .env file. So let me show you how to actually create a new .env file in Visual Studio Code. I'll share my screen and show you. Just give me 1 second. As there was a question about .env files and maybe struggling a little bit to create those. So I'll show you just just how to do it. Okay, here we are in our code, our VS Code. And on the left-hand panel, you can add a folder or a file or something like that. And I'm going to click Add File. And we're going to type .env. That's it. Nothing else. Just .env and hit enter. So this file is going to be used for storing our environmental variables. And usually we define environmental variables differently than we would a local variable. So usually you would say local variable this way with lowercase letters. And if it's a multiple word variable, you're going to use underscores to separate those words. Well, actually, environmental variables work the same way, except we usually capitalize all of the letters. So for an environmental variable, you would type environmental variable, right? And multiple word variable, you would just type them like this. All right. So we're going to want to add 2 environmental variables. We want our SendGrid API key to be an environmental variable. And you can put in, you're going to get some number, or I'm just making up a key, but you're going to get something like that as your API key. And you can stick that in this file. And then you're also going to have a reminder email, which is going to be the email address that you use to send emails. This is the registered sender. And you may also want to keep that private if you want. It's just going to make sure that other people don't know what the privated sender email is. But of course, if you end up actually sending an email to someone, they'll know that email address. They won't know the API key though. Okay. And hi there. Good to see you in the stream. Okay, so this is basically how you create a .env file, and you can store as many keys or protected informations as you want in this file. But for now, we only need these 2 values. Okay, so definitely a good thing to know. Now the next step I'm going to add is your gitignore file. So I'm going to show you how to create a gitignore file, and why you might want to do that. We'll explain that too. So we're going to add our .env file to the .gitignore file. And this is so important so that your secret keys don't get uploaded to GitHub when you eventually upload your code. So you want to navigate. I'm actually using the GitHub desktop client because it's pretty easy to do this in the GitHub desktop client, but you're certainly welcome to do it with the command line if that's where you're more comfortable, or even manually write the file. But here I am on the repository, the July 2023 Global Hack Week repository that I have uploaded on my account. And to add this file, we are going to want to go to repository, which is one of the different tabs on the app, and click on repository settings. Okay. So once you do that, you're going to want to click on ignored files, which is going to represent all the files that you'd like for GitHub to ignore when you do version control. And so, yeah, you're going to add files to this list separated by an enter. So you can just add a new space for each file. And today, we're only going to be ignoring a .env file. So you just have to type .env here and then click on save. All right. Oh, sorry, everybody. I think it was not visible here, but hopefully you were following along. So basically, you go to the GitHub desktop, click on repository settings, and then click ignored files and .env. Okay, so here's some good questions. What about when we deploy it to production? How would they know the API keys? That's a great question. So when you deploy your project to production, you're going to be hiding your code, on the server side. So you're not going to be giving. You don't need to give the API keys to the user for them to use your website. So that's we actually don't need them to know the API keys. Like your user can tell you, hey, I want you to send an email, and then you can route that request to the backend and handle all of the API call on the backend. It's exactly like IAM45145V says, we hide them and then create .env file in the server side, right? So this is so that when you and your colleagues or your community are working on a project together on the public place like GitHub, where anyone can access your code, this is so that they cannot see your private key. That's the only reason we do this. All right. So now I'm going to show you how to add the send email function. Okay. So the send email function is over here. It actually comes mostly from the SendGrid documentation. So I kind of just repurposed the SendGrid documentation for this function. But essentially, we are creating a message object or a message variable, and it's a mail object from the SendGrid API. And so there are several different parameters in the mail object. So we have from email. So it takes some from email, some to email, some subject, and some body. So these are all the different attributes that the mail object will have. Okay. And then we have a try catch statement down here where we are going to try to connect to the SendGrid API using our key. So yeah, you're going to want to write out this line, sg equals SendGrid.SendGrid API client. And then SendGrid API client will take in a key to try to make that connection. Okay, and then in the second line here, we're going to send our mail object through this API client. So, and then we're going to store whatever comes back to us as a response. So if the response is 202, that's actually a successful message. So it will return true. If anything else happens, we did not get a success. And we could raise an exception and print that out to the user and return false, right? So that's kind of how this works. He said, you can call me Ashish. Okay, no problem. I will call you Ashish. Okay, so thank you for telling me that. All right, so let's see. How would a backend service provider know, as we are also using gitignore too? So you would not use a gitignore file for deploying a production quality, deploying an application for production, because yeah, when you're producing that on your server, you're not using GitHub to serve the website or the application. So you can leave it in there if you want, but its only purpose is to tell Git which files you should not track changes for. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and copy this code into our project. Ahead and go to our app.py file, where we have a lot of functions already defined. All right, so here we are in our app.py file. And someone asked, would we be using .env for production or just normal? Well, the advantage of using the .env file is that if you update your environmental variable, it would change everything in the project all at once. So let's say you get a new API key from the company, or you want to start billing your requests to a different API key or a different account. You could easily update the .env file, and then you don't have to update it everywhere in your application. Or let's say you wanted to sell this product to another company. They want to buy your hack planner, but you don't want them to use your key to bill all of their email requests. You want them to set up their own account with SendGrid. So you would sell them the project, but you wouldn't sell them the .env file. So I think you would still want to use .env. But if you choose, there's no reason why not to use it. You could just directly put the keys in your project. It just might not be as convenient. So hopefully that answers your question. But some really good questions today. Thank you for that, everybody. But yeah, I'm going to go ahead and add in our send email function to our app.py file. All right, let me do that real quick. So I just pasted it in, and you can see actually that some errors came up. So we got this error that, hey, we don't know any of this stuff. Reminder email, SendGrid, mail. We don't know what this stuff is. Oh, actually, there should be an extra quote mark there. Let me update that on the slides too, so that you have a string. So that's kind of a problem, right? That the project doesn't even know about these things. So yeah, we're gonna go ahead and update that. Hopefully you all are caught up a little bit here. We're going to also create a function on the checklist.html. But actually, before we do that, I want to address some of these errors in our project, which I think we really should address before we continue. So let me go ahead and work on that with you all right now. So we're going to go up to the top of the file, actually, and we're going to import some new libraries. So one of the first libraries we're going to import is OS. And OS stands for operating system. It allows Python to access the different directories in your environment, in your local environment. And so we're going to use that to access the environmental variables in our .env file. All right. Another thing that we're going to import is SendGrid. So you remember we did type pip install SendGrid. So we can actually import that now into our project. And finally, we're going to import from SendGrid.helpers.mail import mail. So we're going to import that mail object as well. So that's going to be really useful. Maybe I didn't install SendGrid in this. Oh, it's already satisfied. Good. Just wanted to double check that with all of you. So yeah, now when we scroll down to our function, you can see that we actually don't get an error anymore. We still get this SendGrid API key error though, and I'm going to show you how to resolve that too. So we're gonna, and let me actually paste this into our slides. Sorry to update these a little bit ad hoc here, but I just wanted to right. And now I'm actually going to put a new one, which is going to be to import the environmental variables, and I'll put the codes for that as well. So we're going to use these two .env variables, and SendGrid API key and reminder email, and we're going to actually use those in app.py. So the way we can do that is we can type in SendGrid API key. That's going to be our local variable, and we'll also have one for reminder email. And we're going to use the method os.getEnv. And yeah, we can type in SendGrid API key, which is the name of the environmental variable. And then we're also going to type in the name of the reminder email environmental variable. All right. So that's really good to add as well. And yes, you could also use os.loadenv, which is going to load all of the environmental variables. Okay. So now we have put in our environmental variables here, and we can use them throughout the project. So you'll see down here that we no longer have an error when we call these local variables. Right. So we're basically done with our app.py file now, and we're going to go to our routes, our routes now. So we need to actually scroll down and add a send email route. And we're going to use a post method for this. And for our view function, we're going to call it send email route. And we'll have some data that we're going to get from our request. And we can get the item, which is going to be like that task that you might have in your Hack Planner. And I just made up this subject. You could make up any subject you want, but this one is just saying, hey, reminder, here's the item. Right, so remember that emails, they take all of these different information and you can pass a different value for the subject or the body. And so that's why we're setting it up this way. Remember that our send email function actually is going to return a value of true or false. That's the way we set it up. So, if it's true, then we can also return true. And if not, then we'll just return false. Okay. It seems like I also didn't import JSONify, so let me do that too up here. That's a Flask method, by the way. Okay. And all of these, the correct code base is available on GitHub. So if you ever get lost with all the changes I'm making to these slides, I definitely apologize for that, by the way. But you can just reference the official code base on GitHub repo. So this is, what if I use load env with data? Will it still take all envs? It's a good question, actually. I think you'd have to look at the documentation. I don't typically use that that one, but yeah, maybe I'm sure there's a way to do that. Now we've built a route, which is going to connect, in a sense, our back end with our front end. So we're saying, hey, if you ever get sent to this send email route path, make sure that you trigger this view function, right? And so that's really good to have. Now we're going to go on to the checklist.html, and this is also in the slides. This is on slide number 71. We're going to have our send reminder email function. Right? And that's going to go in our checklist.html file, and it's going to go into our script at the bottom. So we already have this set reminder function, and I'm actually going to edit this function to have a new line where we're going to have send reminder email. Okay. With an item passed through. And so in that case, we need to define this send reminder email function. So we're going to build a new reminder email function. It's going to accept item, which is basically the text of the task involved. And for this function definition, first we're going to start off with a fetch request. And what this means is that it's going to say, okay, from the send email route, we want to use method equals post. Say method post. All right. And then we could put in some headers as well. Headers, by the way, are the metadata for your request. So in this case, we're going to specify the content type. It's JSON. And a request is typically also going to have a body. And the body will just be a JSONified. Well, actually, we're going to take out of the JSON object, we're going to take the item string. And so we're just going to pass that item. All right. So hopefully that makes sense to all of you, this fetch request. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to send a chat. What's the topic for what we're doing right now? We're implementing a API, and we're actually doing that in the context of our Hack Planner app, which we've been working on for the past 2 days. So we're adding in this feature where we can click a button and send an email reminder to the user. So right now we're fetching information from a send email path, which is going to be basically, a way to collect information and then eventually send it through SendGrid API to the user. Yeah, we're basically preparing the package right now. All right. So then we can say then response. So we're saying what's going to be the response here, and response.ok is it means whether or not the reminder was sent successfully. So if we get this response, this response.ok, then we'll send to the console that reminder email sent successfully. But if we don't get this, unfortunately, that would mean that we did not send the email. So we could just send failed to send reminder email. Right? So, right? And if we get an error, which is totally possible, we'll catch the error. And we'll just say error occurred or something like that. And we can actually return the error itself. It's going to be really useful for debugging. Right. So in summary, this function is really designed to send the reminder email. So we have this post request that we prepare, and then we wait for the response to see whether that email was sent successfully. Okay. And so, this is sort of how we're routing information from the back end, from the front end to the back end. So, now we have that complete. Okay. And the next slide here says more updates to checklist.html. We actually have even more updates than this, so I'm sorry to continue to leave out some information from the slides, but I want to send an additional edit, which is going to be our reminder button. So make sure you add in that button as well. It's going to remind the user. Okay. Actually, I think we already have that button from previous, so that's totally fine. So now set reminder is also going to trigger this send email reminder, and that's going to then communicate with the backend. And with this route, once you go to send email, whatever information was sent there is going to be acquired and used. Okay. Via the send email function that we specified in Python. So this is just showing you how you can communicate with the backend using information from the front end. Okay. So any questions, please make sure to send them. But we're actually going to go back to our slideshow because we have a slide 73, which shows the final result of this. And you can see that when we type remind, it actually sends a reminder 5 seconds after you push the button. So you could ask for a reminder an hour after, for example. You could set the timer to whatever you want, but then it would send you an email. Okay. And Bytehead says, cool. Absolutely. Super cool. But yeah. We've implemented our API. That's awesome. Great job, everybody. And actually, the next slide I have is a congratulations for you. So congratulations. Okay, now we're going to take a brief break while we prepare for our next section, which is rebuilding our project in React and Node.js and Express.js. So we're going to take a quick break. I guess we'll come back in around 5 minutes, and yeah, I'll see you all then. right, everybody. Hi there. Good to see you back from the break. I hope that you enjoyed it. It's good to stretch the legs when we're learning. Grab a little drink. I have some coffee. Good stuff. So anyway, we're going to be now switching gears, and we're going to try and rebuild our Hack Planner project, but we're going to use a different framework. So we're going to be using React, Node, and Express. And so that's going to be really good. But first, let's learn about React. And what is React? So it's a JavaScript library used for building user interfaces. And it was developed by Meta and is used very widely. So one of the core concepts is this virtual DOM. Does anybody know what DOM stands for? No, that's not good. I'm sorry to hear that. It might be because it seems like, it sounds like maybe you used a name that was SWSW. I honestly don't know how they decide who is in violation, who's not. But yeah, I think in my experience, the more information you give them, the more likely they are to approve your account. I really don't know. But yeah, I'm sorry that didn't work. Hopefully the rest of this workshop you should be able to do. At least the rest of today we should be able to do without using SendGrid. But yeah, document object model is exactly right. That's what this is. And so, oh gosh, that's not what I wanted to do. Hang on. There we go. That's like so imposing. And then you can't even see the slides. All right. So thank you for that. And so it's actually a virtualized document object model that we can sort of play around with in our code base, and that will help us build our UI. And then the other phrase I wanted to highlight is in this next bullet point, which is component-based architecture. So has anyone in the chat heard of this idea of components? It's a way of organizing your front end, and it's allowing you to reuse modular pieces of code for your front end. And so the key here is that components can manage their own state, which means that you're able to update the values in one component without affecting other things, and they can be composed. So we can use many components to compose a website. All right. So then what we have here is used in conjunction with other libraries and frameworks. And that is popular for its efficiency, flexibility, and large ecosystem. All right. And it's ideal for developing modern, interactive, and responsive web applications. All right. Now we're going to move on and say, what is Node.js? So Node.js is a JavaScript runtime built on Chrome's JavaScript engine, and it allows running JavaScript code outside of a web browser. So Node.js is providing you event-driven, non-blocking I/O model. So what does that mean? Well, what that means is that when you have an event, like let's say someone subscribes to a email list, or let's say the website receives new data, you can use those as events to trigger some kind of response from Node.js. And non-blocking, what that means is that the Node.js framework is not going to wait around for response from one part of the code. It's going to go ahead and continue to execute. And so it's efficient for your resources and for speeding up the application. All right. So the next step here is that it's used for building scalable, high-performance server-side applications, and has a vast package ecosystem known as NPM. Okay. We'll also have over here that there's many libraries and Flame frameworks. It has a cross-platform compatibility, which is a main reason for building web applications, actually. And so, yeah, let's go ahead and get started with implementing this. So first, we're going to set up Node.js. And so we want to install Node.js by going to nodejs.org. And you're going to want to download the installer that's for your particular operating system. You're going to want to run the installer and follow the instructions for Node.js on your computer. And by doing this, you're also going to be installing NPM, which is the Node Package Manager. So I'm just going to go to this website here and show you what I mean by that. And hopefully you can see nodejs.org on your screen. And we're going to want to download this first link, which is 18.16.1 LTS. And LTS, I think, stands for long-term stable. No, long-term support. Sorry, long-term support. So that means that the version is very stable, and it will be supported by Node.js. So we kind of want to download that LTS version. And yeah, just follow the instructions, and that'll be really useful for you. Right, and so the next step is to create a new directory, and I'm actually going to share my screen and go back to my my Visual Studio Code. So let me do that. Right, so I'm actually going to put all of this stuff in a directory called Flask because we're not going to be using it. It's all going to be kind of history from our first part of the workshop. So we'll just put all that stuff in this Flask directory. All right, and then we can collapse that directory. So you can see I just moved everything into the Flask directory there. And I'm going to create a new folder that I'm going to call, I don't want to create a new folder in here. I want to create it outside of the Flask directory. I called it a React Express node, I think. Because actually, we're not going to be using the MERN stack, which would imply we're using MongoDB for our database. But we're going to be doing something pretty similar. So this is our new directory, and we can put additional files here. But before we do that, we want to run in our terminal a command. And so the first command that I think we'll run here is called npm init, which is initializing our node project. All right, and it creates this little package.json. Oh, actually, we don't want that. We want to put it inside of our directory. So let's navigate to that directory. Okay, so now you can see we have in our package.json, these are all the dependencies and things like that that we would have. Okay. The next step is to install. So we're going to install quite a few different libraries. These are all dependencies, essentially, of our project. So we have things like Express and SQLite 3, which are frameworks that we're going to use for our backend and for our web framework. CORS, which is stands for cross-origin resource sharing, which is going to efficiently share resources between the different components of our application. And then we have SendGrid, of course, because we're going to be implementing SendGrid API, and our .env, which is going to help us sort of import those environmental variables that we used in Flask. As you can see, we have in this is all the modules, node_modules. These are all the different dependencies for a particular node project. Okay, so hopefully you all can see that. And thank you, it's Jayway, for sending that in the chat. I really appreciate your help. And by the way, for anyone who wants the slides, that's really what we're following right now. So I'll send you that over. Okay. So excellent. Great work, everybody. And now we're going to be setting up our React. And so we're going to use npx keyword here. And we're going to use the keyword create React app. We're going to call it our checklist app, just to match up the checklist terminology with what we were doing in the Flask app. Okay. And so this is where we're building this infrastructure for our front end. It's going to take a little while because you need to install lots of dependencies. So we're just going to wait for a moment for it to install. And does Vita also work for this? I believe it would. Yeah, there's no reason why you wouldn't be able to use Vita. Okay. So it seems like everything started up, and this is one of my favorite things about React, as they say, happy hacking. It's awesome. We love to see it, as Ryan would say. Okay, so yeah, now we're going good, and our next step is to go into the checklist app directory. Do that by typing cd checklist app. And then we want to use our Node package manager to install Axios. So you might be wondering, hey, what is Axios? So Axios is a way to build routes. So it's actually not native to, or it's not like by default installed with Node. And so that's why we're going to do that here. By the way, all of these steps are already present in the slides, so you'll be able to check them in the slides as well. All right, so next we're going to do our import statements, and the import statements are twofold. So we have, let me just go into here. So we have our source folder here, and we're going to go to the app.js file. And you can see already we have some import statements from different parts of the project. But we're going to want to include other ones. So we want to include React. And we're going to actually specify that we want the useEffect method and the useState methods to be imported. We're also going to have or Axios from Axios here. Okay. So what are we doing here? We're importing in our Axios routing library. We're also importing in our React library and two specific React hooks that I'm going to talk about next in the slides. So let's go back to the slides and talk about these a little bit, because they're pretty important for everyone to know about who is developing with React. Okay, so the first one we're going to talk about is the useState hook. And so the useState hook is a React hook used for managing state in functional components. And what that means is that we're going to be updating the values and calling the value of that variable. We're not going to be doing that with iterative programming. We're going to be doing it with functional programming. So, instead of saying x equals 5, we would say set x, and then we would pass in the value 5, right? And you might wonder why do we do it this way? Why do we do it functionally? And one of the main reasons is because it fits very well with the modular design of React. So we can sort of update the values within and specify the scope very, very well. And another reason is just because of the way that React has been architected. So it's just been made a choice to make this functional. And so, yeah. If you declare a default value in the useState hook, that's done by when you instantiate passing in some argument here. So you could say useState 0, and that is going to set the default value of the variables to 0. And so in this example that we have here, count, set count are the two different objects that are created by useState. And count is just a variable that stores the current state value. And set count is the function that is capable of updating the value of count. And so, yeah, it's just like it's said down here. It simplifies the management of your state. And it's also just a choice to use functional programming for this that has turned out to be very popular. Another hook that I want to talk about with all of you today is the useEffect hook. And the useEffect hook is probably the second most popular hook in React. And useEffect is a React hook for handling side effects in functional components. So you might be asking, what's a side effect? Is it like when you take a medication and one of the side effects is you get really sweaty? No, it has nothing to do with normal side effects. What it actually means is that you're going to trigger some process, or in other words, trigger some logic within the code when the useEffect is when some event happens. And so check this out. It says allows performing actions after rendering or when specific dependencies change. So for example, when you render the file, maybe it triggers something to pop up. It runs after every single render by default. So anytime you visit a new view, it will just happen. And so the first argument in a useEffect is the function which contains the side effect logic. So this little curly brace here, whatever contents exist in the curly brace, those are going to be the logic of the useEffect hook. And the second argument is an optional argument, which will be an array of dependencies that could trigger the effect. So you could also put other conditions that might cause this effect. But an empty dependency array would only trigger the effect once upon rendering. So here are some use cases. We could fetch some data, subscribe or unsubscribe, have an event listener ready for a user input. Those are just some of the ways that you can implement useEffect. Okay, says phew. Yeah, it's a lot of information. I know, but yeah, it's kind of important stuff. So This next slide is going to be where we will start off by defining our use state hooks. So in our function app, we're going to include these use state calls. So let me go back to our code in the Visual Studio Code Editor, and I'll show you exactly how we're going to do this. So below, we will have, remember these are constants. We have items and set items. So this is similar to our tasks that we had in the previous Flask app, right? We built an empty list that was items, but now we're using a use state hook to make state management compatible with React. So we will add a new use state hook, and the default value of that use state hook is an empty list. So yeah, that's just going to start us off with no items on our checklist, which makes sense. Okay, and then we're also going to define another use state, and this one's actually going to be used for figuring out what we might want to add or edit in our project. So yeah, this is just going to be an empty string at first, but this could be used for having new items in our list, whether that be a user inputted new item or some edited item that we want to replace with an old item, or we want to replace an old item with this new item. That's how it's gonna go. So it's just a string that we could modify according to user input. Okay. Oh, sorry. We only see your face cam. Sorry about that. Here it is. Here's the code. Luckily, I didn't get too far before you all caught my mistake. So thank you for being vigilant in the chat. But yeah, basically, these are the two different states that we will create for this React framework. For this React project, excuse me. Right? And now we want to handle the use effect. So you might remember the use effect, what that is from our slides. We did that on slide. Which slide did we do that on? Slide 91. And so now we're going to do use effect here. So use effect is how we're going to get all of the items for our project. So let's go ahead and start. Type use effect. And remember that use effect can take two different possibilities. So the first is the logic, right? And so we're actually going to create a new method called fetch items, which is going to fetch all of our items from the task list. And the second parameter this is your dependencies. And remember, if you pass an empty list, it will only return this logic once upon rendering. So we want to do that. So we're going to pass an empty list as the argument here. Okay. The next thing to do is actually define this fetch items function. So we're going to do that. Const fetch items. And this is where we're going to get to that question we got at the beginning of the workshop. What is asynchronous function? And this is a really great thing to know. So asynchronous function, once again, is going to wait for a handshake from a promise. So let's imagine we send some data to a server, and we want to hear back from it at some point. Well, we don't want the application to continue running the logic of this fetch items, because what if it renders the items state and actually we didn't receive anything back from the server yet? It would just render an empty list. So what we're going to do instead is we're going to ask it to try to get, or actually to post something using the Axios. Right? So here's our response that we're awaiting. So we use the await keyword here. So we await for this response by posting to Axios. We're going to post to our local host 3001, which is where the Node.js backend is located. And we're going to post new item, right? Oh, I'm sorry. This is not fetch items. I apologize. Got a little bit confused there. We want to actually do a get request for this. Yeah, I was a little confused by that. I was like, why are we doing this? I was looking at the wrong line. Sorry about that. But yeah, we want to do a get request actually, because we want to retrieve the information from this items route. And then we want to set the items state to whatever data exists in that response. So whatever we get back from the server. Now, imagine we were to get rid of this await keyword and just have this, right? Well, it may run this, it may initiate the get request, right? So far, response is not defined. Then we do set items to response.data, and the items get set to none because there was no response yet. So that's why we add this await keyword, and that's why we do this asynchronous logic, so that when we get a response, that's when we will set the items state. Okay. And we want to make sure with every try statement in JavaScript, we do a catch. So we want to catch whatever error might be there. We'll just log the error to the console. Okay. So that's pretty good. Just logging that to the console. All right. The next step is going to be adding an item. And we're going to do that for next time, actually, because we've already covered a lot of information today. So I don't want to go into that too much, the CRUD operations, but we will do the CRUD operations for tomorrow. In the meantime, does anyone have any questions about what we've covered today? So today we did a lot of information. We linked up with the SendGrid API. Hopefully some of you who got an error from SendGrid were able to get that resolved. Maybe tomorrow you'll hear back from the SendGrid customer support and they'll be able to approve your account. Yeah, I definitely want to give everyone the opportunity to get that SendGrid account working so that when we do our React implementation, we can send emails. Mr. MPH says, I think we got banned. Yeah, well, I don't know. I think maybe they have some kind of automatic process for flagging accounts. But I think once they review your account, they'll probably be able to let you pass through. But all right, well, thank you all for joining for today. And in the last workshop, which we will host tomorrow, that's going to be where we get working on implementing the CRUD operations as well as our persistent database and our SendGrid API. So that's going to be really great, and looking forward to it. So I'll see you all for next time. Thank you.